this guy was getting drafted and we knew he was going to New Orleans and it was a weight concern, that was bad then. New Orleans isn't some place that just gives health. Like that's a place you go, you gain 10 pounds, you go out there, you drink, have a good time. That's what the culture of New Orleans is.
A lot of people are pissed off right now with DeMarcus Cousins. People in New Orleans, they are mad. Dare I say, people in New Orleans are triggered. They're offended. They're insulted that DeMarcus Cousins would have the audacity to blame the city for Zion Williamson being the biggest bust of this generation. And to be honest with you, if you want to judge based on hype and expectations, you can make the case that Zion Williamson is one of, if not the biggest bust in the history of the NBA. You got to remember, coming out of college, this dude was being hyped as the next LeBron James. 6 years in, and the only thing that Zion has in common with LeBron James is their love of crowns. LeBron crowned himself king, and Zion crowned himself Burger King. I understand why people in New Orleans are upset with DeMarcus Cousins. Oftentimes, when people are upset about something, it's because they know there is some truth to it. I happen to agree with DeMarcus Cousins. It was a horrible idea for Zion Williamson to start his NBA career in New Orleans, but not because of the city. It's not the city's fault that Zion is a disappointment. The reason I say it was a mistake is because the Pelicans are the worst organization with the worst head coach and the worst front office in the entire NBA. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. If you happen to stumble across this video, be sure to check out my main channel, Behind the Line. Search Behind the Line here on YouTube. Should be the first channel that comes up. It is no coincidence that Zion's best season in the NBA was under Stan Van Gundy. Why was Zion able to thrive under Stan Van Gundy? Because he held Zion accountable. There was no such thing as light practice. Practice was 3 hours. There was no such thing as being out of shape. If you were out of shape, Stan Van Gundy, he would run your ass until you were in shape. Instead of keeping Stan Van Gundy around, instead of keeping a general, a real leader at the coaching position, David Griffin fired his ass because the role players didn't like him. Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, they didn't like him. Someone please make that make sense. Since when does a general manager make coaching decisions based on the opinion of role players? Well, KC, Brandon Ingram's not a role player. B.I. is a huge star. B.I. is a role player. B.I. is a second option on a playoff team and a third option on a championship team. How many times has Brandon Ingram made All-NBA? 0. What does that make him? A role player. I think people are misconstruing, misinterpreting what DeMarcus Cousins was saying, what he meant. Yes, it sounded like he was blaming the city of New Orleans. Yes, it sounded like he was absolving Zion Williamson of responsibility, and we'll get to that here in just a second. But the sentiment, the overall sentiment of what DeMarcus Cousins said, he was right. New Orleans was the worst place for a guy like Zion Williamson to start his NBA career because the Pelicans don't have anyone in the building who will hold him accountable. This organization has no culture, no leadership, no goals, no expectations. Zion is not a self-starter. He's not a self-motivator. You can claim that the money should be all the motivation that he needs, but the reality is it's not. Zion needs someone to hold him accountable. No coincidence that the best stretches of his career came after he was nationally criticized, humiliated. Remember last year when the crew on Inside the NBA humiliated Zion Williamson? What happened afterwards? His ass got in shape and he dominated the rest of the season. That motivation should not have to come from the national media. It should be coming from your head coach. Problem is, the Pelicans, they've got a youth pastor at the head coaching position. Willard Green, he's an excellent Sunday school teacher. He's the best deacon at church. As a head coach in the NBA, Willie Green is the worst in the league. 6 years in New Orleans, and there have been no expectations on Zion from the organization. Hell, there are no expectations on the entire team. You know what the expectations were for the Pelicans going into this season? Yeah, me neither, because David Griffin never had any. He just said, we are going to figure things out as we go. No expectations for the playoffs, no championship aspirations. It's like David Griffin is building a set of Legos. He'll just figure it out as he goes. Zion has not worked in New Orleans because he's a soft player in a soft organization. And that is a lethal combination. Go look at pictures of the Pelicans practice facility. You know what they have painted all over the walls? They painted words like compassion, understanding, family. It looks like a fucking Sunday school class. Soon it'll say, turn the other cheek. Not one time does it say, win at all cost, because that's not the goal. That has never been the goal under David Griffin. This dude is not interested in building a championship team because that comes with expectations. David Griffin has admitted publicly that he does not like the pressure that comes along with a championship roster. He doesn't want a winner. David Griffin wants a family. This is an unserious franchise with an unserious owner, which led to an unserious superstar with unrealized potential. Even though this disaster is the Pelicans' fault, Zion Williamson, he is not blameless here. LeBron James, he overcame the incompetence of David Griffin in Cleveland and won a championship. In the NBA, superstar players, they can overcome an incompetent front office. As a superstar, especially as a superstar who needs motivation, needs leadership, you have got to speak up yourself. You've got to take up for Stan Van Gundy and make sure role players don't get him fired. Zion Williamson had to demand excellence. He has to demand greatness. He has to demand that the Pelicans get him a coach that knows how to call a pick and roll. He has to demand that the front office builds a roster that complements his skill set. But KC, they can't do that. He's never healthy. Yeah, they can't do that now, but they were not doing that in the beginning. From day one, the Pelicans have treated Brandon Ingram like the superstar and Zion like the role player. B.I. is introduced last during pregame introductions. As the real star, you have to demand to be called last. You have to demand to be the face of the franchise. At the end of the day, it's Zion's legacy that's on the line here. 10 years from now, no one is going to remember the ultimate weasel. No one will remember Willie Green. No one's going to remember David Griffin. 10 years from now, when people look back on this era in New Orleans, this era of disappointment and disaster, the only one they will remember is Zion Williamson. Boogie was wrong to blame the city, but the sentiment of what he is saying is right. And look, he's not the first one to say this either. The Pelicans were the worst place for Zion to get drafted. This franchise is a joke. They think they're immune to criticism. They revoke media credentials from anyone who publicly criticizes them. Don't take my word for it. Just go ask the guys at Boot Crew Media what happens if you criticize the Pelicans. Like I've said before, if I am Zion Williamson, I am demanding a trade today. Not tomorrow, today. You have got to save your own career. You have got to get to a coach. You have got to get to an organization that will hold you accountable. That is never going to happen in New Orleans. And look. The Pelicans should want this too. You've got to start over. You have got to get this mentality out of the building from top to bottom. Now, will the Pelicans do that? Doubtful, which is the exact reason I quit following this team. But give me your thoughts on this. Boogie Cousins blames the city of New Orleans for Zion being a bust. Although it ain't the city's fault, I do think it is the organization's fault. Was Zion doomed from the beginning because the Pelicans drafted him? Or do you put all the blame on Zion? You tell me. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys tomorrow.